So it is impossible to understand US imperialism without talking about Cuba. Cuba is ground zero for US imperialism. It is the place that it is born. It is the first love. It is the one that got away. It is the obsession of many generations of US politicians. But to understand all this, we kind of have to go back in time to a very under talked about war, which is the Spanish American War in 1901. Basically, what this is the death of the Spanish Empire. They've only got a few colonies left, specifically Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Philippines. And they have basically all raised up in rebellion against Spain, and they're very close to winning and kicking Spanish influence out of the countries for good. America, however, decides that it has a moral crisis at this point, and the government gets split into two about how they're going to respond to all this fighting kind of going on in their sphere of influence. One party says we should go and intervene and help these places actually break free and become democratic countries. This is the idea of self-determination and all the ideals that America talks about, helping the free people of the world be free. That's one half. The other half says, my God, isn't this a golden opportunity to snap up some colonies ourselves? See if you can guess which side wins. So, America intervenes in this war and becomes known as the Spanish-American War. One of the main places they are fighting in is Cuba. And America sends troops there to help the Cuban insurgents and guerrillas kick the Spanish out and then win their independence. And while Cuba's gone, hooray, now we're finally free, we got our independence, America goes, we helped you, right? So we're going to want something in return. Specifically, we want to have a lot of influence in your politics, and we want a bit of land as a thank you for coming to help you. The bit of land is very famous and will play a big part in this story later. You may have heard of it. It's called Guantanamo Bay. And they signed this thing called the Platt Amendment, which basically means that Guantanamo Bay is indefinitely leased to the US government. Now, the next couple of decades, things kind of go, it's an uneasy kind of piece there, but it's good enough. There is technically democracy, and for the most part, Cuba is doing okay. But as always, as we saw in Guatemala, as we see everywhere, eventually a democratic government comes along that wants to start improving the lives of Cubans and diminishing US influence in their politics. America does not like this. It absolutely hates it. And in 1952, the CIA organizes a coup and they kick out the government and they put in this guy called Batista, who is an absolute right-wing dictator, as they always are. And this guy will immediately start doing the same things you started seeing in Guatemala. They start basically taking over the entire Cuban sugar industry, which is massive. And about 70% of agricultural land in Cuba gets given to US corporations, and the conditions for all the workers drops hugely. The new unions are basically outlawed. It becomes a very repressive society, and the material wealth of the people of Cuba starts dropping quickly as all the wealth is just funneled off the island to US corporate interests. Anyway, this will set the stage for our next two most important and very famous people to enter this story. You may have heard of them too. One is Fidel Castro and the other is Che Guevara. These guys will then lead a communist revolution in Cuba and will kick out the Batista regime and install a communist government into Cuba. America absolutely hates this. They hate it for two reasons too. First is obviously America is super duper anti-communist, and for that alone they are going to really mess with Cuba. But the other is they take it personally because they always considered Cuba like the little brother. It was their place that they had helped liberate, and it's a good sign of how America is a benevolent and loving, free people, the beacon of the West kind of thing. And Cuba, again, was their first intervention. And now here it is, not only breaking away from US influence, but going full communist as well. They get absolutely outraged. And America announces an embargo against Cuba. So if you ever wondered why Cuban cigars are illegal in all of Hollywood movies, that's why. Basically, all the exports to and from Cuba are illegal to America, and they will absolutely decimate the Cuban economy as a result. Now, from this point then, Castro's retaliation is to go, okay, well, we're going to declare Guantanamo Bay now illegal. We consider the Platt Amendment to be null and void. We want that land back. And America says, absolutely not. And they then say, all right, we're now going to get rid of this Castro regime. And they launch another famous but not famous enough event known as the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. And the US basically gets a bunch of the people that ran away that joined Batista in exile when they left the island, when Castro took over. They give them heaps of guns and ammo and everything, and they launched them into Cuba to go and take down the government. But Castro is ready for this, and it is an absolute disaster. The attempted coup is thwarted almost immediately. The guys are either massacred or captured, and it's a complete debacle. But this has a carry-on effect that Castro now sees the fact that America is going to keep attacking Cuba until they get it back. And he starts taking the defense of Cuba very, very seriously. The way he decides to answer that is to go and ask the Soviet Union for help. Go on, fellow communist countries, let's do our alliance, let's help each other, and we could really use some Soviet military assistance to bolster our defenses. The Soviet Union agrees on that on the condition that they let the Soviet Union move nuclear missiles into Cuba. This is another very famous event coming up now. And basically, again, America has not stopped messing with Cuba this whole time, and there are always spy planes flying over the island, and one day a U-2 spy plane spots these missiles on Cuba, and it launches what's known as a Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, they will have a couple of weeks of basically heated debate between the two countries, and everything starts escalating. America then upgrades the embargo to what they call a quarantine, and they will completely surround Cuba with US military ships. This thing comes this close to World War III, but eventually they work out an agreement where basically the Soviet Union agrees to take its missiles off Cuba if America agrees to take its missiles away from Turkey. As keep in mind that even though America is outraged about the fact the Soviet Union have missiles on Cuba, America has been surrounding the Soviet Union with nuclear missiles for decades, so the usual hypocrisy you see from the US imperialism. Anyway, this will be basically the final nail in any kind of relations between Cuba and America, and the embargo will continue until, and this is insane, it'll continue until 2011, when Barack Obama will be the one who lifts it, and even then, relations are not normalized between the two countries. They are not friends in any way. And I think it still stems from that whole, America takes this stuff personally. Like, whenever they lose a country that they used to have a lot of influence in, they get very emotional about it. It's really funny. Like, they did the same with China. Like, nationalist China and America used to be great friends. Iran and America used to be great friends. And then once these governments change and they become not being, basically US puppets, America takes it so personally. And Cuba is also the great example. Anyway, one of the very interesting things to come out of this is the fact that Cuba is often used as an example of communism not working. Like, look at how impoverished, Cuba is. How can that be a sign that, communism works? They go, oh, hang on, this island has been under embargo for 70 years. Like, their economy has been artificially sabotaged, destroyed. They've had to fight off coups. They have been getting smashed by US imperialism in all sorts of little proxy ways for decades. And look at what they have still managed to accomplish. Like, Cuba has basically zero homelessness rate. They have one of the best healthcare industries in the entire world. They're one of the world leaders in cancer research. Their literacy rate is enormous. It's like 98% or something like that. Last I checked, it was like 97, 98%. They're one of the most highly educated populations in the world. And they managed to do all of this while under embargo. So when people say, like, communism doesn't work, I go, all right, well, if you want to prove that communism doesn't work, then why do you keep messing with it? If you want to prove communism doesn't work, leave Cuba completely alone for 10 years and let's see what happens. Like, open up the normal trade routes, don't mess with them in any way, and let's see if communism works or not. But of course, America spends all its time and money investing in destroying communism because America knows communism does work. That's specifically why every communist country that comes along, America will basically go to war with or launch a coup against or mess with in every single way. You see the same thing with Venezuela, but we'll do another video on them later. Anyway, this is basically the birthplace of US imperialism is Cuba, and it is something that they are still salty about today. So if you ever wondered how we got to that situation, that's the basic overview. And hopefully this has given you something to think about.